But I've realized that we have, in our church, we have a troublemaker. And I realize we have a troublemaker, and we're going to deal with that person today right here in the sanctuary. Now, some of you are getting awful afraid as soon as I say that. And some of you are thinking, I announced on Wednesday night that we were going to be dealing with this morning. There's a lot of people that ain't here this morning. So it kind of makes you wonder, don't it? We're going to deal with the troublemaker. We're going to bring this person right out in front today so everybody can see them. In fact, the person that I'm talking about, now if you're visiting with us, this does not apply to you, right? You can just sit back and enjoy today and not even worry, because this does not apply to you. The troublemaker I'm talking about, he or she is actually sitting on your pew. And some of you think, well, there's only two people on my pew. The ones of you that there's only one person on your pew, you're thinking, man, I'm in trouble. He or she is actually sitting on your pew, but I want to tell you something. This person is not to your left. This person is not to your right. The person I'm talking about that's causing our church so much trouble, the person I'm talking about is actually sitting in your seat. Now, if you're confused about who this person is, I told you, and I gave all these to each one of you, and I said, please don't open this till I say. And I'm not even going to ask how many of you have already opened it. But if you'll take this envelope in your hand, I took the liberty this week to actually print out a picture of the person that's causing our church all this trouble. I want you to open your little envelope and take a good look at who it is that's causing our church all this trouble. He's a scary looking fella, ain't he? The problem, I want to say this morning, I want us to take this to heart, and we can laugh, we can joke, and I see you showing the mirror to each other. I want to say this very seriously this morning, I want us to take this to heart. The problem with Crestwood is in the mirror, not in the rest of the membership. The problem with Crestwood, I am absolutely confident, is in the mirror, not in the rest of the membership. If you remember, it's been 3 years since Elijah has pronounced this drought in Israel. Right after Elijah pronounced this drought, God called him away, and now Ahab has literally spent 3 years searching everywhere in other kingdoms and other cities. He spent everywhere looking for this man, Elijah. Well, in chapter 18 of 1 King, Elijah comes back on the scene. It's been 3 years of this severe famine, and Elijah's walking down the road, and as he walks down the road, he runs into one of Ahab's servants, a man named Obadiah. Obadiah was out searching for water, and as he's out looking for water, because the cattle, the donkeys, they're all going to die if they don't find some water, as he's out looking for water under Ahab's command, he runs into Elijah. Well, Elijah told Obadiah, you go tell King Ahab that I'm back and I want to talk with him. And Obadiah immediately became afraid because he said, I know what's going to happen. About the time I go tell Ahab that you're wanting to talk with him, that you're wanting to meet with him, God will call you somewhere else, and then Ahab will kill me for lying to him. Right? But verse number 10 of 1 Kings chapter 18, Obadiah tells him, he says, look, there is not a nation, there's not a kingdom around here where we have not searched for you. And everywhere we've gone, they said, he's not here. And we've made them swear to us that you're not there. And now here you are showing up and you want to talk to Ahab? Again, though, Elijah says, you go tell Ahab, I want to talk with him. I'm back and we've got a conversation we need to have. So verse 16 tells us, it's not in the PowerPoint, but 16 tells us Obadiah went to meet Ahab. He told him Elijah's here, and we're told that Ahab went to meet Elijah. Look with me at verse number 17 of 1 Kings chapter number 18. The scripture says, then it happened when Ahab saw Elijah that Ahab said to him, is that you, O troubler of Israel? And he, Elijah, answered, I have not troubled Israel, but you and your father's house have, in that you have forsaken the commandments of the Lord, and you have followed the Baals. Now, there's 3 words that come to mind that are going to help us frame our discussion this morning around this text. The 3 words I want to look at this morning are accusation, confrontation, and application. First, let's look at the accusation this morning. Again, verse number 17. The text says, then it happened when Ahab saw Elijah, Ahab said to him, is that you, O troubler of Israel? Notice here, Ahab saw Elijah. This is the first time Ahab has laid eyes on Elijah since Elijah had pronounced this judgment on Israel 3 years earlier. Immediately after Elijah had announced that it ain't going to rain no more, immediately after that, God called Elijah away, and Ahab hasn't seen him for 3 years. Ahab has spent the last 3 years searching in every nook and cranny, every house, every palace, every kingdom, every nation. He spent looking for this man, this one who he thinks is causing Israel trouble. And now Elijah has showed back up, and Elijah has called a conference with Ahab. And I want you to kind of think through this with me. Imagine the moment when Ahab and Elijah come face to face. What emotions do you think were stirred up in Ahab the first time he saw Elijah after this long interval? He has spent 3 years looking for him, wanting literally to take Elijah's life. And now, here Elijah is standing right in front of him. Don't you think Ahab probably was like a thermometer where you can just see the heat rising into his face? Rage, animosity, suspicion, all these things were probably fighting one another inside of Ahab's heart. Ahab certainly thought to himself, when he saw Elijah, he thought, now there is Israel's real problem. Ahab saw Elijah, but then the text tells us that Ahab said something to Elijah. Now, what Ahab saw actually led to what Ahab said. Ahab's words revealed his heart, just like it does for us. What comes out of our mouth is actually coming out of our heart. Look at what Ahab says. The first words out of his mouth were not, I'm sorry. The first words out of his mouth were not, this is all my fault. His first words were not, Elijah, please ask God to forgive me. No, you'll notice that Ahab didn't even offer Elijah a cordial hello. The first words out of Ahab's mouth when he saw Elijah after 3 years was, there he is, the troubler of Israel. The word troubler, the Hebrew word, literally means to roll, like stirring up the water, like causing water to boil. In other words, he's saying that Elijah, everything was calm, everything was fine. But we know for a fact everything wasn't calm, everything wasn't fine before this famine came, because there was unmatched adultery in Israel. There were unholy alliances in Israel. There were ungodly activities going on in Israel. Everything wasn't fine. But he looks at Elijah and says, everything was just fine before you come along and you stirred the pot. He looks at Elijah and he says, there he is. The one that's been stirring the pot, the one that's been causing all this trouble. You'll notice Ahab's first instinct when he sees Elijah was to start playing the blame game. He's just like Adam and Eve in the garden. God comes to the garden, and God, of course, already knew what had happened. And of course, Adam turns to Eve and say, well, the woman that you gave me, Eve, she made me do it. And really, in essence there, Adam was blaming God. He wasn't just saying Eve did it, but the woman that you gave to me, she's the one that made me do it. So really, God, this is your fault. Right? And then God looks at Eve, and Eve says, well, the serpent, he's the one that made me do it. And then God looked at the serpent, and the serpent didn't have anyone to blame. Right? That was the very first activity between God and man all the way back in the garden. And now Ahab, in the same way he reacts, he sees Elijah here, and he says, you're the troublemaker. Let me ask you a question. Why is it that humans take offense so easily? People get offended so easily, but they take blame so rarely. Why is it people are so quick to get offended at everything you say to them, but why is it that so rarely do people say, you know what, this is actually my fault. I'm the problem. I'm the one to blame. The answer is a little word with a big presence, and the answer is pride. We tend to assume that our pride is not as bad as other people's perversions. Well, I'm not doing what they're doing. What they're doing is perverted. It's unholy in the sight of God. Now, yeah, maybe I have a little pride that I don't deal with like I ought to, but my pride is not the same as their perversions. However, God ranked a single proud look, just one look, when you look at somebody else and think you're better than them, God ranked that single proud look right beside of the 6 other things that he hates, even the things that he considers an abomination. Why is it we are so quick to get offended, but we're so slow to be accountable and to take the blame and say it's my fault? Ahab thought that Israel's problem was in front of him, but in truth, Ahab's problem, Israel's problem, was within him. You see, Ahab looked everywhere for the thing that was causing trouble in Israel. He looked everywhere but in his own heart. So number one, you see the accusation. Ahab looks at Elijah and he says, there's the troublemaker. Number two, though, secondly, will you notice with me the confrontation? Look again at verse number 18. Elijah answers Ahab and he said, I've not troubled Israel. Ahab, this is not my fault. I've not troubled Israel, but you and your father's house have. Ahab, this is your fault. Ahab, it's like at a bad breakup. You know, you look at somebody and you say, it's not you, it's me. When in your mind you're really saying, but it's you. You're the problem, right? It's like a bad breakup here. And Elijah looks at Ahab and he says, Ahab, it's not me, it's you. In other words, he says to Ahab, you're the man. Right? You're the reason, Ahab, that everything's so dry. Now, what was it that Ahab had done? What specific reason was there for the drought? Well, verse 18 goes on to tell us. He says, you and your father's house have caused the trouble in Israel. The end of verse 18 says, in that you have forsaken the commandment of the Lord and have followed the Baals. I want you to notice the words that Elijah used to describe Ahab's offenses. He says, Ahab, I've not caused this trouble. I'm not the one that stirred the pot. You and your father's house have done that. He says, in that you have noticed, forsaken the commandments of the Lord and followed the Baals. This word forsaken, when he says to Ahab, you've forsaken the commandments of God, certainly Elijah meant that Ahab had refused to obey them. He meant that Ahab had rebelled against the commands of God. But when he says to Ahab, you have forsaken the commands of God, he doesn't just mean, Ahab, you have abandoned God's command. I find it very interesting that one of the meanings of the Hebrew word we translated forsaken is actually to loosen. What he is saying to Ahab is, Ahab, you have loosened God's law. You have loosened up on God's commands. In other words, he's saying to Ahab, you have loosed yourself from God's restraints. In essence, Ahab, you have loosened up on the law of God. The Hebrew word translated forsaken, it paints a picture of someone loosening up a rope. It's like a dog. If you put your dog on a leash and your dog's not used to being on a leash, he will do everything he can to fight that leash. He will pull his own ears off trying to get that thing off of his head. And that's basically what Ahab has done here. He has loosened the restraints of the law. He has abandoned God's commandments. He has literally pulled his own ears off trying to get the rope off his head. This is another message, but that really is what many of us have done. We have literally loosened up the law of God. We've loosened up God's commandments. No longer does the Word of God hold complete sovereign authority over our life. Rather, if we're honest, our own emotions, our own opinions determine our direction more than the dictates of God does. Not only, though, has Ahab forsaken the law, furthermore, notice that Elijah says you've also followed after the Baals, multiple, not just one Baal, not just one god of the Sidonians, but you have followed multiple other gods besides the one true God, Jehovah. Rather than loving and serving Yahweh, Ahab has violated the first and the second of the Ten Commandments by chasing and carving multiple gods in multiple images. Now, you see, it's as if Ahab has come to Elijah and he said, Elijah, you the man. And then Elijah has looked back at Ahab and said, no, Ahab, you want to see Israel's real problem? It's as if Elijah looks at Ahab and says, Ahab, you want to see the real problem? And then he pulls out a mirror and he lets Ahab look into it. Elijah's word brought Ahab face to face with Israel's real issue. The problem was not the prophet, the problem was the prince. That brings us to number 3. Thirdly, finally, I want to show you this morning the application. So we have seen this accusation. Ahab says to Elijah, this is all your fault. We've seen the confrontation. Elijah says to Ahab, no, Ahab, this is on you. But look at the application. The application is not found in the text, but there is a very natural and obvious application to our own lives that we can really take from this interaction between Ahab and Elijah. The application this morning is simply that we must assess ourselves before we accuse anybody else. If I were to ask you right now, and you knew you could get away with answering it without anybody hearing it, and you knew you could get away with it without me thinking any less of you, if I asked you right now what or who the biggest problem in our church is, what would you say? If I was to ask you what the biggest problem is, and I would say, look, I'm not going to tell anybody, show me a picture. Let me pull out the bulletin. Let me pull out the church directory, and you just put your finger on the person that's causing our church the most trouble. If I was to do that this morning, where would your finger land? If any other name or any other picture than our own was the first answer that came to our mind, then we've likely proven ourselves that we're the guilty party. Yesterday, we had a memorial service for my dad in Wilson, where he was from. And it came time to leave. Mom's keys were gone. The car was locked. Her keys were completely missing. And one of the granddaughters was riding with her. My little niece, she's 5 or 6. And she said, I didn't touch them. She just kept saying, I didn't touch them. Well, we finally found the keys in a seat in another room of this church where Mom had not been. And as soon as they were found, I said, here they are. And my little niece, first thing she said, wasn't me. You know what that told me? That's exactly who it was. Before we're so quick to say, it wasn't me, it's not me, I'm not the problem in the church. And we're so quick to say, it's got to be him, it's got to be her. And we'll name, and I'm as guilty of this as anybody. And we'll name everybody else, but we never even stop and consider, wait a minute, could it be me? We would never even think to ask ourselves the question, could I be the problem with my church? Before we're even qualified to pluck the splinter out of our neighbor's eye, we have to address, like Jesus said, we have to take care of the log in our own eye. I want you to get the picture in your mind of an ophthalmologist, an eye surgeon, getting ready to do surgery. I know David's got his eye surgery tomorrow. Donna's just had an eye surgery. Donna, I want you to imagine if the doctor walks in the room and he's got those black glasses on, he's got that cane in front of him, and he walks in the room, and you realize that the eye surgeon that's getting ready to do surgery on David is blind. Would you be confident if you're going to get cataracts removed and the doctor comes in, he's got his white coat on, but he's got those black glasses on and he's feeling around with a cane trying to find the way to you? Would you want him to be the one operating on your eyes? But this is what we do in the church. We act as a bunch of blind ophthalmologists, and we're telling everybody else, you got a problem. And all around, we're wearing the black glasses and feeling around with the cane and not even stopping to think, maybe it's me. Like Ahab, we literally see others coming, and we think to ourselves, you might be out in the hallway and you see somebody coming down the stairs, and the first thought that comes to your mind is that right there. That's our church's real problem right there. And though we would never say it out loud, we solace our own hearts with the thought that that's the trouble with our church. That's the troubler of Israel. When all the while, God who sees the truth and the God who sits upon the throne of heaven is saying the trouble with your church is sitting in your seat. Our problem is that we are quick to clear ourselves and just as quick to condemn everyone else. You think about the Pharisee and the publican in Luke 18. The Pharisee, as he's praying, his chest is puffed up. He's very proud of himself. And he said, God, I'm not like this publican over here. I fast. I pray. I give tithes. I mean, he is just rolling off to God all of his list of accomplishments. But then over in the corner, there's a man standing kind of far away from everybody else. He's a publican. He's a tax collector. He's the worst of the worst in that culture. And he's standing over there beating his own chest. And he is saying, God, I'm unworthy to even come to you. I am such a terrible sinner. The Pharisee looked at the publican and thought, now there's a man that doesn't really know the Lord. There's a man that doesn't have it right. But God looked at the Pharisee and said, no, there's a man that doesn't really know the Lord. There's a man that doesn't have it right. Pride is so deceitful. If you don't think you have any pride, if you would say, well, look, I don't struggle with pride. Really, the essence of all sin is pride. Pride is at the root of all sin. And when it comes to judging others in the church and pointing out everybody else's issues, it really comes back to our own pride. We're like the Pharisees standing there saying, I tithe, I fast, I'm doing everything right, but look at him. Pride is deceitful, though. If you don't think you have any pride, allow me to ask you this one question. Do you ever allow yourself any excuses that you would never allow anyone else? Do you let yourself use excuses that you won't let anyone else use? The other day I was having a conversation with somebody, and they were, this is not even a joke, they were sitting there and they were telling me how much somebody gossips all the time. And they were just going on and on about how all these people just gossip. And I finally looked at them and I said, what are you doing right now? And kind of sheepishly, they looked back at me, and I looked at them, and we both said, we're gossiping. But we're guilty of that, aren't we? Is there anything that you would excuse in yourself that you wouldn't excuse in somebody else? If there is, and the reality is, if you get honest with yourself, there is, then that's an evidence that there's pride in your own heart. Pride sees everyone else's faults while completely overlooking our own. Ahab literally has caused this drought in Israel, and he has the nerve to look at Elijah and say, "You the man. It's your fault." I think sometimes we come to church in our mind, we might even say it to a friend, or we might just say in our own mind, our own heart, we say, "Did you see what she was wearing?" And God says, "Do you recognize how immodest your own soul is?" We might think, or we might say, "Did you see what he did when he thought nobody was looking?" And God responds, "Do you realize that I saw what you did when you thought nobody was looking?" We might say, "How dare him act like he loves Jesus?" And God might respond, "How dare you act like you love anyone but yourself?" We might think, "She is such an absolute fake." And God might say, "It takes one to know one." We might say, "I can't believe the direction our church is heading." And God might shake his head and say, "I can't believe you think you're the only one in the church who knows the right path to take." We might, after we leave here today, because I know I'm going to be looking for a new church next week. I've already looked some churches up online where I might visit next week after y'all vote me out today. But we might say to ourselves, "Can you believe," some people are going to leave here today thinking, you might not say it, you're afraid to say it, but you're thinking, "I can't believe our pastor talked to us like that." Can you believe what the pastor said to us? And God might respond, "Has it ever crossed your mind that maybe I loved you enough to send him to you to say it?" We might say to ourselves, "Our church has just lost something, and maybe I need to look for a new church." We say to ourselves, "Our church has lost something," and God responds, "You're right, your church has lost something, and it's your love." We might say, "Our church is just so dry," and God might answer, "Then get your finger out of the faucet." How often have you sung to yourself, no, not out loud, but in your own mind, "It's them, it's them, it's them, O Lord," standing in the need of prayer? If we are at all honest with ourselves, we are all at times guilty of the accusations of Ahab. So even Benson don't like this. However, we have to remember that we are going to one day be judged using the same measuring rod that we have used to judge other people. This morning, we've been really not confronted by me, but confronted by God. And I'll tell you what, it stings. You know what? And I'm going to be very honest, very transparent with you. As I studied, as I prepared for this message, I was thinking, and I was thinking of people that needed to hear it. And then it was like God said to me, and God didn't use this language. He said it in Hebrew, but it was like God looked at me and said, "You idiot." Here I am thinking of all the people that need to hear this, and I'm literally trying to get across the point that I'm the problem with Crestwood. This morning we've been confronted by God, and the reality is it stings. Some of you told me last week when you walked out that you could barely walk. What the Bible does is it acts as a mirror, and the Holy Spirit uses it to show us the dirt on our own faces. And I know everybody's joking, but it was so funny how one of our first reactions while ago, I wanted to see if this would happen, how one of our first reactions a while ago was to move the mirror away from our face and start pointing it towards other people. And I know you were kidding, but isn't that amazing how that's the first way we tend to react? This morning, God's spoken to each of us, and He's clearly said, stop looking for the church's problem in every pew but yours. When we have been confronted by the truth, and we have been, now we must deal with the reality that's been revealed to us. I'll be honest, our church does have some problems. And the good thing is, a lot of you don't even know about it. Because you love each other and you are just trying to be faithful to God. There's some things going on that you don't even know about. Some things that are going on that if they don't get corrected, we're going to have to deal with. But the reality that I want you to take away this morning is not looking around here, who is he talking about? If in your heart you're thinking, who is he talking about? Then I need to start back at point number 1 and work my way all the way through. When we have been confronted by the truth, it is our responsibility then to deal with the reality that's been revealed to us. The reality that's been revealed to me this week is that Crestwood's biggest problem is on the platform. And some of you are thinking, I agree with him on that point. And your thought should be, Crestwood's biggest problem is in the pew. It's time we take responsibility for ourselves and stop worrying about everyone else. 1 Corinthians 11, verse 31 says, if we would judge ourselves, we would not be judged. What God was saying through Paul was that as if we will discriminate, instead of discriminating against everyone else, if we would discriminate against ourselves first, God will not discriminate against us later. If we will put ourselves on the stand, if we will try ourselves, God will not retry the case. The truth remains, if we would plead guilty to our own offenses, God would gladly pardon, God would gladly reprieve. If everyone in the church, including me, if everyone in the church would deal with their own issues, then you know what? There just wouldn't be any issues left to be dealt with. Nothing will get better until we stop looking at the membership and start looking in the mirror to find the real trouble in Crestwood. It should be our attitude. Now, I'll say this as I'm coming to a close this morning. Unspiritual people, spiritually immature people this morning are going to leave here with their feathers all ruffled up, and they're going to leave here aggravated. No, they probably won't say it to anybody else because they don't want to get rebuked. But all in their mind, they're thinking, I can't believe he was so mean to us this morning. Unspiritual, immature people will leave here with that attitude. But I'll tell you something. Spiritually mature people will leave here saying, you know what? He was right. He was right. I need to deal with me if Crestwood's ever going to be able to move forward. He was right. It's my pride that needs to be put down. It's my selfishness that needs to be sawed off. It's my greed. It's my gossip that has to go. It's my lack of love. It's my envy. It's my bitterness. It's my sin that has to be dealt with if Crestwood is ever going to get out of this dry spell. What is my church's biggest problem? I'll be the first to tell you this morning without any hesitation, my church's biggest problem is right here. And until I get really honest and really willing to deal with this, there's no need in me telling you what's wrong with you. I wonder how many this morning would leave here with honesty in your heart saying, it's me. It's me, O Lord, standing in the need of prayer. It's not my brother, it's not my sister. It's me, O Lord, standing in the need of prayer. I believe this with complete confidence. If we left here this morning, and you know what? I know what's going to happen. Again, I've already said this. Spiritually mature people are going to leave here saying, he's right, I need to deal with me. And what's going to actually end up happening is the people who need to hear this the most will probably leave here thinking, I know he must have been talking to somebody else. But if the spiritually mature people will take this to heart and say, God, I need to get some things right. I need to worry about me and not everybody else. If spiritually mature people will take that attitude and we will all start coveting together, to pray together, to seek God's face together, to repent of our own sins, I believe God would work in this church. God would work around those immature people if the spiritually mature people would honestly get it in their own heart. It's me, it's me, it's me, O Lord, standing in the need of prayer. My challenge to you today is just that. Will you agree with me as I've agreed with God myself? The pastor is Crestwood's problem. And you don't leave just saying, yep, he was right. The pastor is Crestwood's problem. No, you need to leave here today saying Crestwood's biggest problem comes in wearing my shoes and sitting in my seat. And until I deal with that, I might as well not worry about anything else getting dealt with. Father, will you take your word now and will you use it in the hearts of your people?